This episode contains discussions of abuse, violence, and harm that some listeners may find distressing. Please take care whilst listening. There comes a point in stories like this where the focus has to shift from what something felt like to what actually happened. Because understanding the environment matters. Understanding the dynamics matters. But at some point, we have to name the reality. This is Hidden Chronicles. I'm Jenny. I love history and I am fascinated by the moments where human psychology collides with it in the worst possible ways. In this series, I explore crime through context rather than spectacle. I ask not just what happened, but what kind of world made it possible. In the last episode, we saw how things began to surface. Moments that didn't quite fit. Patterns that begin to draw attention. A shift from uncertainty to awareness. Now we move into what that awareness eventually uncovered. Because what was happening inside number 25 Cromwell Street was serious. Evidence later showed that multiple victims were subjected to sustained abuse and violence within that environment. And it is important to say that clearly. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not something that can be explained away. This was serious harm, directed towards vulnerable individuals. Some of those individuals were young. Others were vulnerable due to their circumstances. And that matters. Because vulnerability is not random. It is often recognised. And environments like this, it can be used. Evidence presented later showed that individuals were brought into that environment and exposed to serious abuse. This was not a one-off event. It was repeated. It followed patterns. And that pattern is important because it shows that what happened was not accidental. It was sustained. It developed over time. And it existed within the same environment. It is also important to be clear about responsibility. Both Fred West and Rose West were found responsible for serious offences. At different times, in different ways. But both played a role in what took place. And that matters. Because this was not a situation that can be understood in simple terms. It was a shared environment. A household where harmful behaviour became part of daily life. And that is difficult to understand. Because we often expect harm to look obvious. But in reality, it can exist within routine, within structure, within something that appears from the outside to be completely ordinary. Over time, victims were not only harmed, but they were silenced. Not always through words, but through environment, through control, and through fear. And that kind of silence is powerful. because it prevents what is happening from being fully seen. It prevents it from being fully understood. And without understanding, it is difficult to intervene. It is also important to recognise the scale of what was later uncovered. What was uncovered was not a single incident. It was a pattern. Evidence showed that there were multiple victims over a prolonged period of time. Some were very young. Others were vulnerable in different ways. And that pattern matters, because it shows that this was not random. It was repeated, structured in a way that allowed it to continue. Individuals were brought into that environment, and once they were within it, they were exposed to serious harm. Not as isolated incidents, but as part of an ongoing pattern. What is also important to recognise is who those people were. Not in names, not yet, but in reality. Many of those affected were young, at stages in their lives where safety should have been a given. Others were vulnerable, experiencing instability, isolation, a lack of support. And again, this matters, because vulnerability is not random, it is recognised. And in environments like this, it can be used. Not always in ways that are immediately visible, but in ways that shape who is targeted, who is brought into the space, and who is most at risk. And when we do talk about what happened, we have to hold on to that, because this is not just a story about a place, or even just about those who are responsible. It is about individuals. Individuals whose lives were impacted, whose experiences were real, and whose vulnerability became part of how this was able to continue. And when we look back at cases like this, there is always a question. How did this happen? How did it continue for so long? And the answers are very rarely simple. It involves environment, relationships, missed opportunities to fully understand what was happening. But even within that complexity, there are things that we must be clear about. Responsibility, accountability, and the fact that what happened within number 25 caused real harm to real people. And those people matter. Not just as part of a story, but as individuals whose experiences must be recognised, without being sensationalised, without being reduced, without being forgotten. Because when we tell stories like this, that is what matters the most. Not just what happened, but who it happened to. Next time we move into what followed, the investigation, the discovery, and the moment where what had remained hidden could no longer stay that way. Thank you for listening. Until next time, take care and be gentle with what history leaves behind.